All right, here's a fun day. I decided that actually, this is total happenstance. I left my friend's place, who I'm staying with, an old friend from high school. We had a great conversation last night because they've got a grade 3 and a grade 6 girl and boy in public school in Alberta. And both parents are fairly aware of what's going on. Not quite sure the extent of it, but the message that I'm sharing with people and on a one-on-one basis in conversations and soon on a more broad scale is that we have to be involved in our kids' education. So I left this morning and did a little wander, and as has been my modus, I'm kind of going with the flow. So I got on the ring road and started driving, and I was sort of thinking I would find a coffee shop or a library or something to work from, and I took an exit and I got off the highway, and then all of a sudden signs for Mount Royal University. So I decided to come to campus and maybe find a spot to work here on campus. And it's 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. This is campus. It is completely deserted. Now I thought I'd come to Mount Royal University because I had a conversation with a couple of people who are formerly of Mount Royal. Mark Haist, who's now on Vancouver Island, and who is running for the People's Party of Canada, member of Parliament seat, and has a constituency office talking to people there in the district. And Francis Widdowson, who I've been fortunate to have a conversation in a small group with back in January of this year, not long after she was dismissed from Mount Royal for a wrong think. Now I thought, what better place to share a couple of the stories that George Mann, traditional Nisga'a carver and knowledge keeper, shared with me when I was in Nisga'a territory just last week. So I think I talked about the Island of Skulls. So George told me war stories, and these are and stories of economics, I guess, and trade between the Nisga'a, the Haida, and the Nisga'a and the Tlingit nations of the northwest coast and the panhandle of Alaska. It is unfashionable to speak of indigenous people as anything other than a Garden of Eden type of perfect world that the Europeans stole. And this is the kind of education that's being passed in universities as solid academic work. And if you disagree with the narratives, or your research takes you in contrary directions to those narratives, you can find yourself in significant hot water up into and including dismissal. So George bragged, and perhaps all nations will brag about their ferocity and their conviction in war. And he has a long history, and himself a harvester and processor of oolakan grease. And oolakan grease is a fish grease that was a highly sought after, highly nutritious, fat food source for the Nisga'a. And they traded it with other nations. And the Haida had a reputation of, a series of attempted wars to control the grease trail, the oolakan trail. And George said the Nisga'a always knew when the Haida were coming because they could spot their fires in the period as they approached. And the nights before they attacked, they would light big bonfires, and they would do war dances around the bonfires, and they would dance backwards. Now, I don't know why that's important, but he stressed that as as part of the approach to war. And so the Nisga'a always seemed to know when the Haida were coming. And in one case, a place called Canyon City, which I mentioned before as the last civilized or colonized village in the Nisga'a Nation, the people of Canyon City knew that the Haida were coming. And so the men, for some reason, I guess, were off, perhaps at war, perhaps they were off on the grease trail, harvesting fish and processing the oil, and the women were back in the village. And so the women knew that the Haida were coming, and the grandmothers instructed the young women, because the Haida weren't there to kill them specifically, but to capture them, to enslave them, and to steal resources. The grandmother said, "Okay, well, we're going to seduce the biggest Haida warriors, find the leaders, and play to their desires, and get them into your beds and make them good and hard. And then we're going to send a signal. And when that signal comes, you're going to take out the carving knives that you have hidden in your beds, and you're going to cut their dicks off as close to their body as you possibly can. And then what's going to happen is it's going to go back inside, and they're going to bleed out, and they'll die. And we're going to do this to all but one of these Haida raiders." And so on the signal, there was a tremendous cry from the village as all these men lost their dicks and died by bleeding out, because they're of such a horrible fate. So the Nisga'a, in order to protect their resources, were fierce and ruthless, like many, oh, look where I am. Like many traditional indigenous nations, fought wars against neighboring nations for resources, just like any other human community did throughout history. There was no difference in how indigenous nations treated enemies and other nations than any other human societies at their boundaries did over human history. It's just normal for the course. Now, all over MRU campus is decolonization. What the hell does that mean? Decolonization is an homage to the indigenous people, in a way as if they were innocent people from the Garden of Eden who outside European raiders came in and sought to destroy. But the relationships between indigenous nations and the Europeans were far more complex than this simple narrative. And the censorship that is being acted out, not just in universities, but in the main media sources, in public schools, as much as we've failed to tell the story of relations between the indigenous and the newcomers for many decades in Canada, we're now failing to tell an accurate story, and we've overcompensated for the kind of reality that actually existed. And now anyone who disagrees with the narrative faces potential sanctions and censure and attacks. Now, 25 years ago, I did my thesis, my honors thesis in the creative writing department at the University of British Columbia. Stephen Galloway was one of my cohort classmates. We graduated the same year, did our undergrad. I did my thesis on relations between newcomers and indigenous of British Columbia, and I wrote a long paper on a standoff in 1995 known as the Gustafson Lake Incident, which was the largest deployment of RCMP in Canadian history. At that point, the most expensive deployment. And I tried to tell the truth about how the RCMP was, and the federal government at the time was engaging with indigenous traditionals on unceded indigenous territory, and no one would listen. I couldn't get anyone to publish it. It was rejected everywhere, and it's gathered in dust up until now. Now, if you're interested in learning more about that Gustafson Lake standoff from different perspectives, because I felt that was the most important and honest approach I could take as a writer, as a feature writer on this issue, rather than to take a side, to attempt to get into the shoes of everybody involved, see what their perspectives were, and then make that part of my account of the incident so that people could judge for themselves about what exactly happened at Gustafson Lake. My name is Shannon B. Douglas. This is While We Were Asleep.